love writing. I love the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. I love putting it together, sentence structure, wordplay, puns, like all of that stuff. And I got to my college class and I sat in my journalism 101 and I was like, wait, I know how to do this. And I'm like doing the math on the education that I'm paying for. And I'm like, I feel like I should learn something new in college.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of being authentic in the workplace and navigating it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sadakar, and my guest today is Jill Lyons. Jill is the SVP of Creative Operations at Maximum Effort, a production company that focuses on bringing people together in fun, smart, and unexpected ways across platforms like TV, film, brand, and live experiences. She started her career as an anchor in the traditional TV media space and then quickly moved into becoming a producer, where she worked at the iconic Harpo Studios. She's since held production, operations, and organizational development roles across several different industries and different companies. In this episode, we talk about how Jill has built this thriving career by following her curiosity, building skills at every stage, and being ready when the right opportunities were ready for her, like finally getting that email from an HR manager at Oprah's company, or finding the kind of company that recognized the value that she could bring to the table, even if it didn't appear to be a perfect fit on paper. We even get into the topic of bringing your full self to work, and should you do it, or how should you do it? A topic that is so foundational to this podcast. I can't wait to share this episode with you, so let's get into the conversation. Okay, welcome to Working Your Way, Jill. I am really, really excited to have you on.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of meeting you when you were doing a talk here in Chicago for Creative Mornings, which I actually just aired my talk that I did on a podcast episode. But you talked a lot about your parents and your backstory, and I loved that. And I'm curious, I'd like to start just with, what are some of the beliefs that shaped how you think about work that came from your parents?
I loved that Creative Mornings session. I mean, I love everything about Creative Mornings because it's a time to gather and like be in a space and be in community here in a city that I love, Chicago. And just to give like a little bit of background, the theme for that month was Native. And so that kind of, was what influenced kind of my origin story, right? Because we were talking about like, what does it mean to be like a native to Chicago, right? And to have, I've had this great fortune of building this career, exciting career in creative fields that I love, all while being in Chicago, which is kind of a little bit, maybe not rare necessarily, but certainly unique. And as I was thinking about that, like, gosh, what is it about me and where I'm from and who I am that has kind of helped, lead to this, this cornucopia of experience that I have find myself in, right? And I think, my work ethic has always been very strong, but like 100%, I have to thank my parents and the people who came before them and the people that came before them for just kind of the way that I approach life, right? Like I'm a writer, sure. I'm a producer. I'm an ops person, a problem solver, a fixer. And I think it just comes from having an innate curiosity about the way that things work. I really care about and am passionate about the way that systems work. I'm interested in the ways that they don't work and when they don't work, why they don't work, and really interested and get excited about like motivating teams, cultures, people, groups to do things that are kind of greater than anyone can do individually. Like I am a team sport person, 100%. I always have been. And I just, I think that, has been a theme throughout my work cultures. I've always worked in really collaborative spaces. I've always appreciated and I love creatives. I do consider myself to be a creative, but working with people in creative backgrounds and in creative spaces has always just been really important to me. My dad was a musician. My mom was a flight attendant. So we just grew up with like a love of music and travel. Both of them, my dad was also an educator, right? And so like this teaching and learning culture of just kind of always not necessarily trying to improve and better yourself, but just the world is big and you should be curious and be excited about that curiosity. And so I think, it's that. And then just kind of, the idea that, my husband says this a lot, like things are never as good or bad as they seem, in the moment, right?
Yeah.
In the moment, things can feel really heavy and crazy, good, bad, but having that little grain of salt of like, the sun also rises. Like we can make a way. Everything is figure outable. Let's like just try to do this again tomorrow and do it better, right? Like that's another thing that I've just kind of adopted over the years, which is like, is next week better than last week was in whatever problem I'm trying to solve? And if the answer is yes, we're making incremental gains, right? If the answer is no, we need to stop and reevaluate. So, yeah, I don't know exactly where that comes from. I think it's a little bit of, it's nurture, it's nature, it's astrology.
Yeah.
It's, who are you when you come into this world? And then how are you influenced through your experiences?
Yeah, speaking of astrology, you've got double fire signs. And so you're a doer, right? You're like, let's make things happen. Let's move forward, like, and not get caught up in the what ifs and the we shoulda, woulda, coulda, and all that kind of stuff. And I see that as a theme throughout your career. I mean, you've been someone who gets stuff done and helps everybody else get stuff done in operations and production and being really engaged in the process of the doing.
Yeah. The doing has always been important to me, right? Like, and I'm a recovering perfectionist, I like to say, right? And so I do think I spent a lot of time and a lot of years chasing that perfection, right? And I think that's part of what a producer's brain is. So anyone who's listening is a producer, like instantly knows what I'm talking about, where you're like, oh no, I just need to put things in this order so that I get the result that I wanted to get, right? And so then you start to, if you're a perfectionist, that's great, right? And I think that's one of like the great lessons of growing up, in my career is realizing that, I believe it's a Steve Harvey quote, what got you here won't get you there. And, I think a lot of times, people who are in roles like mine, ops, production, project management, et cetera, you kind of shine because of some of your neuroses, right? Like you shine because you're a little bit crazy. You're a little bit like, oh, Jill's the fixer. She's going to get that done, right? And then I think there becomes a point in your career where there's just like, there's not a neat little to-do list at the end of the day. There's not a tidy job description that you fit in. You can't check all the boxes. And, things are unpredictable. And so I have had to in my career learn how to, certainly use that as a tool, but also understand the nuance, right? Where things aren't always so black and white. There's not always a 10-point checklist and a process that works, that you can just rinse and repeat over and over again. And so I feel like that's kind of my, like, if that was my origin story of perfectionism, kind of the unlearning and undoing of that perfect high productivity culture, has kind of been kind of where I live now,
Yeah, I imagine there's a big transition from being able to control all the controllables to like actually influencing versus going from a spreadsheet and checking the boxes and moving things along a CPS to influencing people to do certain things or behave in a certain way.
Yeah, it gets a lot more. It's like baking versus cooking, right? Like I like to bake because I know exactly how it's going to come out. Like, and to be clear, I don't do a lot of baking, but if I were to pick the two, it's like, great. You give me the measurements, you give me the temperature, you give me the time, and what I'm going to get is what I expected, right? Cooking is nuanced. Cooking takes skill, and cooking takes discretion. And, oh, it's a pinch of this and a dash of that, and watch until brown. And that kind of gives me anxiety, honestly, because I'm more of a like, nope, let's create the recipe and do the thing. But cooking is a lot more fun, right? And like you get a wider variety, you get a richer variety of stuff. and you create new things and you try things that you wouldn't have otherwise, and you stumble upon stuff, right? And that's kind of that iterative creative process that, I think we all need. And, what is so needed in our industry, I'd say anybody who's in a advertising, branding, marketing, content creation space, we need that kind of more expanded thinking, because the old way, it's not working. We've all aged out of it collectively. And, the consumer is wiser, the brands are wiser, the people are wiser. What we're demanding of our brands, our products, the content that we watch, our desire to watch stuff, like all of that is changing and evolving, and we have to do the same.
So Jill mentioned the idea of baking versus cooking. Now, if you're not super handy in the kitchen, just for some context, baking is really about following a recipe to a T, using the exact ingredients and the exact measurements provided. And there's a science to it. Every little part is pretty precise, down to the dish that you use and the temperature of the oven. And all of these parts make this final product work. Now, cooking can be much more flexible. You can improvise. You can't do anything, but you can do a lot of things. You aren't necessarily going to ruin a meal by substituting an ingredient. If you don't like spinach, maybe you put kale in instead, or if you like your food spicy, you could add some chili flakes. Now, if we think about baking versus cooking in our careers, I wonder, are you baking kind of on this linear, highly defined path? You take this role, then this one to get to this end state. Or are you cooking, adding a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and maybe you'll create something that you hadn't even planned to make when you first started. Now, if you want to be a surgeon, your career is going to be more like baking. You have a very precise path. You have to follow certain educational and training standards. But in a lot of fields, this isn't actually really necessary. Jill's career is definitely cooking. She started as an anchor, became a producer, and then from there, it was really all about just taking the next interesting role, following her curiosity, doing some operations work, some organizational culture work, and so on. Now, my career was probably more like baking for the first 2/3. Get a marketing degree, go to work for a consumer products company, check the boxes to get the next promotion. But for the past 7 or 8 years, I've been improvising a lot more. I changed industries. I put my skills to work in very different ways. I went back to school and I started my current business. The thing is, sometimes we think we have to bake when we can actually be cooking. But it takes us taking a step back to look at what we can and maybe want to do in a more broad way. How do you think about your career path? Are you baking or are you cooking? As we rejoin the conversation, Jill is going to share more about how she transitioned into cooking in her own career. I want to talk a bit about your career. As you mentioned a couple of things, right? And one of your first work experience was that you were actually an anchor. You were on the other side of the camera and then kind of quickly moved into behind the camera doing production. You mentioned you worked at Harpo, you've worked at Allstate, and now you're at Maximum Effort. It's just really robust and very diverse kind of career mosaic, if you want to call it. And so one of the things that you've talked about before is like, you think about it more as a pyramid than a ladder or a line. And I'd love to hear a little bit about some of those transitions you made early on in your career and kind of why you made them. And were you able to show up authentically in those stages of your career?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as you said, I like to talk about your career as a pyramid, not as a straight line, right? Because nobody knows. Like, I could not have predicted that 20 years ago, this is the job that I'd be having by any stretch of the imagination. I couldn't even put it into words. I didn't have the words to, first of all, I didn't even know what advertising was post-college, right? Let alone, the detail or the nuance. If you told me I would be in operations, I'd be like, what? I don't even know.
What is that even?
Like, what does that even mean? Is that like, no, I don't want to be a surgeon. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to operate, right? And so, I think about like the career pyramid of what you're really doing is just, the beautiful thing about a pyramid is that you've got this big, beautiful base, and all you're trying to do at the base is to get experience and kind of funnel your way up through the top, right? And so, I think about my early kind of career and figuring out. And I was just at my 20th year college reunion. So this is all very fresh on my mind, like starting out and everything. I went to school to become a journalism major. I was a writer, right? So like I wrote on my high school newspaper. I love writing. I love the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. I love putting it together, sentence structure, wordplay, puns, like all of that stuff. And I got to my college class and I sat in my journalism 101 and I was like, wait, I know how to do this. I've been doing this for 4 years. Like, and I'm like doing the math on the education that I'm paying for. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like I should learn something new in college.
Mm.
And so that just curiosity led me to, kind of the comms department and, oh, there's a radio station. That'd be cool. Maybe I can like learn how to like DJ. Oh, there's a TV station. This is interesting. Like, let me sign up to be the camera operator or the teleprompter operator, I think is like where I started. And like, it just gave me this interesting depth of, okay, what I like about journalism is telling stories. And these are just other tools in my toolbox to tell stories. Now I can tell stories visually. Now I can tell stories, you know, on the radio and excited. And I was still doing the newspaper stuff. And so that kind of evolved, and so that was kind of like the first transition point, which again, just curiosity and boredom of like, well, I already know how to do this. I want to do something different. That next leap happened because I went to school in Los Angeles. And when it became time to get my internship, I didn't want to go work in a newsroom because I'm like, wait, I'm doing that. I'm working at the local news station already as part of my class. Let's go work at MTV. That would be fun. How do I do that? Like, let's go try to get a cool internship, right? And so that pivoted into like development, series development and scripts and trend forecasting. And this is kind of this is like 2002. So like early Road Rules and Real World and like early reality show stuff. And I was like, wow, this is cool. This is like, I like this creative storytelling, right? And so I had kind of been like, I'm going to go be a serious journalist and report on serious things and politics and DC and like, change the world with my investigative journalism. And then I'm like, oh, it's kind of fun to do like just silly stuff too, or like stuff that makes you think in a different way. So that was kind of the second pivot. And the third pivot, I graduated and I had a reel and I had my, my reporter reel from my work at the local station, and I got a job in a small town in Illinois, and it paid $18,000 a year with a 2-year contract. And I did the math, and I said, "Oh, I can't take this job. I physically cannot take this job because I have student loans that I have to pay for this very fun college experience that I just had in Los Angeles, and then I have to like have a place to live. So I'm already out of money." And honestly, it was a transition point of like, well, wait a minute. I don't think this is the life I want. If it's not this little town in Illinois, it's a little town in Indiana or a little town in Iowa. And then what does that path look like? And there was that moment of like, well, wait a minute. I don't know if this is even really what I want to do. So that was a pivot point. And I was like, well, I think I want to live in a big city. Shoot. Like, what do I do? I just moved back to Chicago. I'd like to go to New York, but I don't have any money. So really, it's just kind of out of the necessity of like, that improvisation, right? And I think it's the cooking versus the baking. You could have the formula and say, this is what I want to be, and I'm just going to like come hell or high water, I'm going for that. And I think for a very small amount of people, that totally works. I've always known that I wanted to be a heart surgeon. I always knew I wanted to be a singer, whatever it is, relentlessly go and pursue that path. But I think for the majority of us, it's a little more like, I don't know, I could do that. Sure, I could do that too. Okay, there's stuff I like about this, right? And so it just really was a following of the curiosity. Now, how I landed at Oprah, I had been applying there for a year, basically. And because it was the hottest thing in television to do, not just in Chicago, but in the world. And, when we talk about like soul brand alignment, I am a woo-woo person. I am live your best life. I am Angel Net. Like all of the Oprah things is just like, I was gravitated to everything that was happening there. And after a year of trying, I got in. So now that's a little bit of that relentless pursuit, right? Around the time of the MTV days, I thought, gosh, it would be great to like work at Oprah, and like she's in Chicago. That's really cool because I'm from Chicago. I love that city. And so I think, right, there was a little bit of that, another egg in the basket, right? Like just keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And I was working in PR in Chicago. And I had done that. That was enough of my first job to get me in a very corporate environment. That was certainly the most corporate place I had been at, coming from newsrooms and MTV. And yeah, I said, I'm going to try one more time to get in at Oprah. If not, I'm going to look into jobs in New York. And sure enough, Susan from Harpo HR called me and is like, we have a job. Let's talk. And they're like, do you want to work in promos? And I was like, great. What is that? I have no idea what promos are. So that's how I ended up in marketing.
I'll figure it out. Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, I think I had written in my letter, like, I'll clean like, I'll do whatever. I would just love an opportunity to be in this environment. And so again, like the curiosity and, Oprah says luck is preparation meeting opportunity. And I think I was prepared. I was prepared because I had the right resume of experiences, which only came because of my curiosity. Because if I would have been laser focused, I would have had, print journalism internships and jobs and that kind of stuff. And, I also think I saw the industry changing really rapidly there. This is early 2000s. So this is like local news was still a big thing, but certainly newspapers were already, kind of seeing their great shift. And, I think my advice for the pivoting and the transition is like, you just have to find those shifting point moments, right? Fast forward 10 years at Oprah, I wanted to make a shift and a change. By that time, I had like started a family here in Chicago. And I said, well, I want to stay in Chicago. Maybe I'll try this advertising thing because I'm working in promos, which is marketing and it's adjacent. I'm not an agency person, but I could do that. Sure. Why not? And I like couldn't get a job in advertising. People were like, we don't know what to do with you. Are you a producer? Are you a creative? Are you a writer? Are you a project manager? And I'm like, kind of all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And
you don't fit in a box, we don't know what to do.
Exactly. And again, it's like it's the baking, right? If you are baking a cake and you need baking soda, you need to look for baking soda. Like
you're not going to sub something else.
You're not going to sub anything. Yeah. And and when I came to Epsilon, this data company, they were cooking, and they were like, "Well, this is cool because like we don't want a traditional agency producer. Mm-hmm. We kind of need someone who can wear a couple of hats and build this team out and build this department." So then that kind of was my pivot. And I tell you, every move since then has been cooking and not baking. And I think it comes from that, like that curiosity, and then just the pyramid base, right? Like if you know a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you know how to connect the dots. And that is something that I am good at, which I think stems from my journalism, sentence structure, and putting stuff together. Yeah. It's the same thing with film and producing and storytelling. And it's the same thing with teams and culture and operations and putting the pieces together to make something happen, right? And so I think if you can find the thing behind the thing that you're good at, it will translate, right? It's like that, story. I speak in a lot of metaphors also. I love a metaphor, but it's like that story of like the guy who's he's a brain surgeon and it's his passion to do brain surgery, and he, loses his hand in an accident. Well, does that mean that his whole purpose is now gone because he can't do brain surgery? No. Maybe his passion might have been healing people, helping people. His passion might have been attention to detail. Like there are other things that you can extract. The thing behind the thing will help you broaden your base, right? If you're a storyteller, you can tell a story in any medium. You might have a preferred medium. You might have competency or experience in a preferred medium, but it doesn't mean that you can't try something else. If you write books, you can write movies. If you write movies, you can write songs, right? Like it's not apples to apples, to be clear, but I think we all need that expanded POV and a little bit of what if we just tried curiosity to just open up that worldview. And then it's like, gosh, that pure, like we don't even know. Like I don't even know what my career is going to look like in the future, and like you're less worried about it if you are more clear on what it is that makes you you, on being authentic, on your authenticity, what your unique gifts are, what you bring, where you shine, where you don't shine, right? Then you stop trying to do this whole imposter syndrome of like, oh, shit, this is what the job requires. I have to be really good at this, and I have to like pretend to know what this acronym means and all this stuff. And you start saying like, hey, what's CRM? What does that mean? Can you explain it to me like I'm 5? Because I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I like how Jill talks about the thing behind the thing. She gave the example of a man who was an amazing surgeon, but he lost his hand. Now, was the meaning in his work about executing that specific surgery, or was it actually about healing people and helping people? Finding the thing behind the thing is about taking a more broad perspective. Now, we talk a lot about your innate talents on this podcast, or your natural ways of being, and this is really another way to look at that same idea. Sometimes these might be referred to as transferable skills, but really it's much more than that. It's identifying what's the common thread you can find in so many of your stories. What are you doing when you're doing your best work? Or even finding it in the things that the people in your life love about you. Now, this is one of the benefits of thinking about your career as a pyramid. At the base, you're getting lots of variety in your experiences and trying different things, and this gives you an opportunity to find those common threads. One example of a common thread could be if you're really great at listening to people, truly hearing their point of view, or maybe even in a group, being able to find common ground and create agreement amongst differing perspectives. That is an example of a thing behind the thing. You could be using this in a lot of different types of work settings. You could be a diplomat who brings differing points of view to the table and finding a way that works for all parties to move forward. Or you could be great at consumer insights, where you have to find the most important insight in how people are talking about how they use a product. In both cases, you can use your natural talents to hear the things that aren't explicitly being said. You're connecting the dots, you're bringing ideas and perspectives together. That's a type of talent that can be reapplied in a lot of different ways, not in just one type of role. Now, if you haven't had a lot of variety in the roles that you've had, you can always look more broadly into your personal life and find these common themes and stories of you at your best. I actually really encourage this. The insight could be in the way you plan an event for your family, or the way you pursue hobbies and build expertise in new ways. These insights are really all over. You just have to look beyond the surface and see what trends might lie underneath. I'll share more about this in the wrap up. I'm curious, when you look back at all of these different roles and all of these different companies, are there moments that you can pinpoint where you were really trying to fit yourself into a certain box, you weren't able to show up as yourself, and there may have been some unlearning that came from that experience?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think about my early jobs and like wearing just like, well, and I will say a lot of this is like the time period too, to be fair, right? Like we're always co-creating. So, right, like entering the workforce in 2024 is not the same as entering the workforce in 2002, right? Like it's
very much a different era. Yeah.
Different era, different vibe. I was wearing a lot of like bad polyester business attire.
Right. Yes.
Like everybody remembers their like business button downs that were just like ill-fitting and uncomfortable. But I do think about those times that I was in a room and did not feel comfortable speaking up, sharing, those times where I was the reflection and not the source, and saying, oh, my role in this meeting is to do X, Y, and Z. And my role in this meeting is not to be myself. And, oh, well, that's not a good idea. I don't like that idea. Or, hey, this is offensive. We should not say this, that, or the other. Or, hey, I don't like the way that this person spoke to that person, but I didn't feel like I had the agency or the authority to say something. And I think, it is hard to decipher, like, is that the environment or is that me and my growth? It's a little bit of both. Or is it like, right, like I say all the time, like, when you're in a working environment, like someone's the expectations of a role, that's half on you to meet the expectation, but it's half on the organization to make sure that they're communicating to you what they're asking of you to do, right? And so again, in retrospect, it's like, oh, was I like unclear? Did I not feel safe in that space because someone in the room didn't make me feel safe? Was it not safe? Was that survival? And in fact, like that, keeping myself small in that moment led me to be able to be at better tables or bigger tables or tables where I felt more comfortable, right? It's so hard to like extrapolate and decipher. And again, it's kind of like that whole, like I said earlier, it's not about assigning coulda, woulda, shoulda, and what should I have done. It's about, okay, how do I take the meaning from that experience and make sure that next time I show up differently and I show up better and I show up more authentically. And of course, there were times when I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm the only woman in the room. I'm the only person of color in the room. I'm the only Black person in the room. I'm the youngest person in the room. I'm the oldest person in the, like, there's always going to be something. And then I think like, I did a lot of improv. I've done a lot of improv classes and writing and stuff here in Chicago. And I think one of the greatest gifts to come out of improv, which, very cliche to say, because anyone who's taken improv will say it's the yes and of like, rather than denying like, oh my gosh, I feel so small in this moment because like, I know something's wrong, or they said something wrong, or they did something wrong, or I did something wrong, and you just want to like undo it. It's like, okay, so that happened, and let's move forward, right? To say, oh my gosh, I mispronounced your name. I'm so sorry. Say that again for me. Or like, hey, we don't really say that in 2024. Like, just so you know, next time, like, not okay. Or like, like there are ways to call people in versus calling them out. And I think sometimes we feel like we either have to like make ourselves small and quiet and not say or do anything, or we have to be like, I would like to inform everybody that this is a sexual, violation and blah, blah, like there's a lot of nuance in the middle. And I think a little bit of experience and a little bit of comfort with just the discomfort, getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, because we live in an uncomfortable place because it's crazy out there, right? Like it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Now, and what are we going to do about it? How are we going to bring our little bit of authenticity?
Yeah, I get the sense of it's just kind of like, okay, what am I going to do now in this moment? Right. And I could go back and uproot all the things or analyze the things, or I could take that step forward, right? No matter how big that step is, I can just take a small step in this direction.
Yeah. And that's not ignoring the problems and being like, oh, I don't have time.
Yeah.
Like I can't think about that. Or like, I'm just going to block that out of my news feed, or I'm going to just ignore, what's going on, because that's not the reality either. Right. But it's the yes and, it's the both and. Both things can be true. Both things can be true. I was just listening to Brene Brown's podcast. Amy Webb was on, I think her name is Amy Webb. She's a futurist, and she always has like a big talk at South by Southwest. And, Brene is doing this series, and I don't remember the title of it, but it's like, basically the headline is like, we've reached our human capacity for information. We've exceeded it. We are running an upgraded system on an old computer. Like there's too much coming in. There's too much to filter, to care about, to not care about, to influence, to not influence. So it's like, how do you just to function in 2024 with the barrage of stuff that is going on in the world and in everyone's personal life, and then like to be able to like decipher what you can influence, what you can control, how you can help, how you uniquely can use your voice, your time, your talents, your energy, your finances, whatever it is, to help support and move forward something that is better than what we have today, right? Is next week better than last week? It's an enormous ask. And it's like, it makes me want to like lie down and go to sleep just talking about it. But the answer is somewhere in between. It's not all in and do everything. And again, like, and maybe for somebody listening, it is the quit your job and go, completely change your life and kind of like devote yourself to a completely different path. For some, it's like do nothing at all. And like, I just need to like get under my weighted blanket and survive the day. And then for like most of us, the answer is somewhere in the middle. It's nuanced and it's sliding and it's different. And it's like, what can I do today? What can I not do? And like, my friend said to me, when you're juggling all these balls, you have to know which ones are rubber and which ones are glass, right? So some of them, you're going to drop balls. Especially like, again, it's 2024. So any one base level, if you add on, a demanding career, if you add on any kind of caregiving, whether that's a parent or a child or a pet or whatever, and then, you add anything else on there, the balls are going to drop. But like, which ones are rubber, which ones are glass, which ones are precious? Like, it's a constant kind of juggle to look and see, on any given day, which direction you can or can't go. And it's like, but I think that's that's where the magic comes, is it not in your ability to like place all the balls in the right place, but to be able to kind of nuance and juggle and say, okay, today I'm juggling 3 balls. Tomorrow it's 7. I can only do 1 today. Like, and I think we all, like, we just don't give ourselves permission in this hustle, perfectionism, productivity culture, right? Like capitalism and corporate structures are not built for that. They're built for produce, top line, save
more,
on the bottom line. More. Growth is always the best solution. Yeah. If you got one job, you should have the next job. If you want this title, like the list goes on and on and on. And just the reality is that, like, that's not how we were intended to be. Nature is generative and cyclical and balanced, right? And we as humans are, we're mind, body, and soul. Like, and we can't, again, business, you're in business, you're becoming, you can't forget one of those to save the other two. But gosh, if it isn't like easier said than done.
It really is. And I think one of the big things, and this is such a big kind of topic of this podcast, is like, how do we slow down? How do we check in with ourselves? How do we know that like what served you last year might not be the same thing that you need? And just really doing that, like taking that moment to like explore what you need and how you feel in any given moment. It's not something we're trained to do, especially as women of color. It's like, it's a muscle that you have to kind of rebuild. So
yeah, you have to rebuild or learn for the first time, right? Like, I literally, and I talked about this on my Creative Mornings talk, like, I was someone, because I was a perfectionist, I'm a producer, I'm a people pleaser, like, keep everybody happy, keep all the balls juggling in the air. And like, I mean, I don't think I asked myself a personal question until I was in my like late 20s. Like, what do I want? What do I actually want? And I honestly, it took me coming to like just this like breaking point in my personal life for someone to say, take all that energy that you're focused out here and turn it around on yourself, and you will find the answer. And, I talked about this at Creative Mornings, that, I worked at Oprah for 10 years here in Chicago. And, she would say that her favorite fairy tale was The Wizard of Oz, because Dorothy always had the power to go home. All she had to do was click her heels. She had them right on her feet, and she always had the power. But she didn't realize. She went on this whole journey to realize that she had the power to come back to herself. And so that returning to yourself, that belonging to yourself, and finding your footing and your place and your voice, is so, so important for everybody. But especially if you come from, any kind of marginalized group. I spent a lot of my life looking at myself through the reflection of, right? So I'm not a man, I'm a woman, right? So that's a reflection of this kind of one way of being, right? I'm not white, I'm black. That's a reflection of whiteness. Or is my blackness a reflection of whiteness, or is whiteness a reflection of blackness, right? And so it's like, again, it will take you in if you go down this like
yes, exactly.
So like, how do you do that? And then how do you also like get dinner on the table at 5 o'clock because like the kids are going to be home. So it's like, great, I'm going to like dip into this like existential like thinking and then also get on with my day, right? Like it is an impossible ask. And so I think we have to have grace for ourselves. We have to build the space, like you said, and like it's a muscle that needs to be exercised, right? And I think everybody's got to find their thing or their little kind of toolbox of things that work. And I think obviously there's no magic bullet for everybody. It's all a little nuanced and a little different based on who we are, what we like to do, what our astrology sign is. I'm laughing because we've talked about astrology before, but like, it's going to be different for everybody. And I think one of the great unlocks of 2024, like, I went to high school in the 90s where like everything was like a Gap ad where like, I don't know if you remember this like very particular Gap ad with like everybody in the same khakis and they were doing like a West Side Story thing, but it was like, you wanted to be the same. And like, I see in my kids and, just in culture, like that individuality and expressiveness and space to be an individual is like so much more prevalent than it was, when I was a kid. And like, that is a good thing. We should be holding on to that. I want people to show up. We talk about bringing your whole selves to work. I do think there's an overcorrection on that because it's like, we don't need to bring all of our parts of ourselves to work. Let's bring our whole professional selves to work because some of the stuff your coworkers don't want to see or know.
Yes, exactly. I totally agree. Let's talk about bringing your full self to work. What does this really mean and should we do it? I think there are a lot of different ways to interpret this. I think where this message goes wrong is when we say being authentic at work means there's no assimilation whatsoever. In my opinion, this isn't realistic or appropriate, to be honest. For example, if I go to a foreign country, I'm going to follow the norms of that place. I'm going to try to speak the language there. I'm going to drive on the correct side of the road. I'm going to behave in ways in public that align with the locals. Now, does this mean that I'm not being my full authentic self? No. Now, I know that this is kind of an extreme example, but the idea here is that we can assimilate to a culture or a norm without being inauthentic. At work, we assimilate in some ways to function well within that ecosystem. Being human at work means being able to share your feelings with your boss when you're having a tough moment in life, but it doesn't mean you're expressing every emotion that you have in every daily meeting. Bringing your full self to work means not having to check your social identity at the door, but it doesn't mean sharing all of your personal business with all of your coworkers. Working your way authentically means doing work that leverages your natural talents, your work styles, and your way of being. To me, this is how we can be authentic while also assimilating to the norms of the modern workplace. This all really lies on a spectrum, and there's a range of how much you can or even might want to bring your full self to work. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. Now, you're the SVP of Creative Operations at Maximum Effort.
Yep.
How is this role enabling you to show up authentically, and what is authenticity in your current job, in your current moment in your career? What does that mean to you?
Oh man, I love my job for so many reasons. I feel like I am in the right time and the right space and the right place with the right people, right? And so there's kind of this alchemy that's happening when you kind of have it, when you can find all of that, right? And I think, again, not everybody's particular role and the job that you have has to be your passion or your purpose, right? But it is your job to know if it is or isn't, or if it's close, or like, right? Because then, you might like I was talking to my therapist about like, and I don't even know if this is this might not even be the plot of Billy Elliot, but it's like, they want him to play football and he wants to dance, like, right? Sometimes you're like playing a sport. And again, like I said, I don't know if that's the plot of Billy Elliot, which sounds silly. I think it is. Maybe we'll look that up. But like,
but if it's not, don't come for Jill.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't come for me. This is not verified. But like, he wants to dance. Like, and so sometimes you're at a place where you're like, this is football and I want to dance. And like,
Yeah.
that's okay if you know what you're doing. If you're like, I'm playing football, maybe I enjoy football, but I want to dance on the weekends. Like, if you can make a life doing that,
Yeah.
and if your soul is content with that, that is a perfectly fine thing. Not everybody's career profession has to be your purpose and
Needs
your,
to be your
you
life purpose.
know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think you're gonna, we ebb and flow in and out of that, right? Because again, we're always co-creating it. It's like the hand surgeon or the surgeon who does well. If the accident like, that's not his fault. It's
Yeah.
not like he did anything to cause that, but now we have to do something different, right? And so I just feel like I'm in a really great space. Max Effort, we are a lot of things, but we are all about bringing people together in fun, smart, and unexpected ways. And like, we're open to however that shows up. We're open to how that shows up, whether that's a TV show or a film or a brand campaign or a stunt, or just something that's happening in culture that we want to be a part of. And it kind of reminds me of my roots of like, being in the newsroom, right? You kind of like come in the morning and say like, oh, what's going on today? What are we reporting on? What's happening? What news just broke, right? And we kind of do that, but in culture, which is really cool. And so, I feel very fortunate to be able to bring a little bit of structure and order to what is a chaotic and fun and crazy place, and just a time that we're in where we get to kind of play in these spaces. So I have a lot of fun, and I have a lot of gratitude for my position, my role, and really my whole career. I've just had the great fortune of just working with amazing people. And as I said at the beginning, I love creatives. I love the way that creatives think. I love the way that creatives see the world. I love when people share their points of view, and you kind of have to be authentic to be a creative, because you have to show what you know, right? You're telling a story. And like we talk about in comedy is always like, oh my God, that's me. When you see something and you're like laughing hysterically, or oh my gosh, that's her, or that's you. I know that person. Or oh my God, I would never, right? And so there's a little commentary on like a very human truth is comedy at its best. And you kind of have to have your ear turned up to that to be bold enough to produce your work, right? To ship your work, as Seth Godin says, like, to get it out in the world. And so I just always admire and appreciate working with just really smart, creative people. And I've had the good fortune, really since the jump, since my Oprah days, to work with really smart, talented, creative people. I think of a lot of my coworkers as my friends, which is past coworkers, current coworkers, future like once we've done something together, like you're kind of in the circle, which I think is common for a lot of people in creative industries, right? Like we were just talking before we started about, you going up and seeing some old coworkers and your old stomping grounds. And, again, for some people, they like to like go to work and leave work at work, and like that is totally fine. And for me, I love the integration of the creating and the messiness, and just really kind of getting my hands dirty with a group of people who want to make something better collectively than what we all could do individually.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's very much a culture of like, okay, you're gonna have a ton of creative ideas, right? Just bring all the like off the wall, zany, like cool, culturally relevant things to the table. And then a lot of what you do is, okay, how do we actually go get this done, right? How do we go do something around this? So it's this like great combination of your creative side and your kind of tactical, forward moving
Oh
side.
yeah, yeah. And I'm like, I've had to learn for myself over the years to like not talk myself out of a crazy idea, because I'm a producer by mind. So I'm like, oh,
Yes,
that great next
totally.
American novel that I'd like to write. Well, this is all the ways that it won't happen and why it won't. Okay, we're not going to do that, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's fun to collaborate and be with like expanded creative thinking of like, yeah, why can't we? And I feel like, this was us at the Oprah show, is like, let's take the audience to the moon. And it'd be like, great. When are we going? Like there was no like, no, we can't do that. That's impractical, blah, blah, blah. We don't have a budget for that. Like all of that, all of those limiting kind of beliefs of keeping things small, right? I
Yeah.
feel very lucky to be at a place that is expansive and to have spent a lot of time in expansive, kind of curious places. Curious places, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely can relate to that. Like I am a doer, I'm organized, I'm detail oriented. And so sometimes that has me saying like, "Oh, that's not practical," or that doesn't make sense before it's time to do
Of
that, right? And
course.
so it's like
Of
staying in that
course.
creative space is like always something I have to keep making
Yes.
myself come back
There's
to.
a great book called Designing Your Life, and it's I forget the author's name, but they teach like a class on happiness. I think it's Stanford, and they say in the book, like, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 5. And so they've got this exercise where you plan out your next 5 years, but you do it 5 times. So you're like, okay, in 5 years, I'm going to like, go back to school and get my MBA and, move to New York City, right? Great. Now you did that and you can't do that anymore. So you can't get your MBA and you can't go to New York City. So what are you going to do next? Okay, well, it would be fun to like write a book and live in Tahiti. So like, how do I make that happen in 5 years? Like, so the game is to do that. And then the goal is once you're done doing that, you look at all those and you start to see like, hey, if I didn't have limits on my thinking, I actually could probably do any of these paths in 5 years. Now, do you want to? Is it feasible? Is it practical? Is it financially the right? Like all of those things you can filter. But then maybe something starts to bubble like, okay, maybe I don't need to get my MBA, but maybe I want to take, a business class. Or maybe I don't want to move to Tahiti, but maybe I'd like to go to Tahiti. I could probably make that happen in the next 2 years or something like that, right? And so you just start to like unlock that curiosity bubble. It's
Mhm.
a really great exercise. And, I kind of, as you were talking about, like when you take time to listen to yourself, I always find that like those kind of like exercises, I'm a sucker for any kind of worksheet or exercise or
Yeah.
self-help book. And so I do all of
Same.
them. But that is one of
Yeah.
my favorite ones that I kind of come back to of like, sometimes you have to just suspend that doer brain or that practicality brain to
Yeah.
unlock the something new that you would have already edited yourself out of otherwise.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like the editing. Yeah. So, as we kind of wrap up here, what are some of the things that help you grow as a person, whether it's personally, professionally? What are the tools and the resources that you rely on?
Oh man, like I said, I'm a self-help junkie, so I love a self-help book. Anything relatively masking itself as a self-help book, I'm into. And so I'm a big reader. I am someone who reads multiple books at a time. So I have my Audible books, I've got my Kindle books, I've got my live book at any given moment. I love journaling. I many years ago did The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Um, and that idea of morning pages has just stuck with me. And so kind of anytime I'm feeling stuck, or feeling a little itchy, right? Like you kind of get that feeling like, oh, I've got stuff to say or think or do. Sometimes it's just getting it out on the paper. So I swing in and out of those kind of phases. And kind of my shortcut version of morning pages is mind mapping. And so it really is just starting with like a topic in the center and literally freehand drawing all of the topics that kind of bubble up and the topics that bubble up from there and the topics that bubble up from there. Like, if I were to use the example of like Tahiti, just because I said it, like you put Tahiti in the middle, oh, little thought bubble. You put Tahiti in the middle and it's like, okay, warm, beach, island life. Like, okay, I'm digging that. Okay, warm. Maybe I'd go to Florida for the weekend. Like Florida, And so you just start to kind of like
Mm.
connect the dots, which I think is central for me, is like usually when something's kind of irritating me or if I'm in a growth moment, it's because something's not connecting and it needs to. I like yoga. I like to, go to church every once in a while. I would like to say I'm an every Sunday goer. I'm not. But I try to do things that fill me up spiritually and that give me just that little bit of pause and reflection. Easier said than done. But I can always tell when I'm doing too much and I'm like, we might need to just dial it back a little bit here. I'm an overcommitter. I will sign up for all the things. I will volunteer for all the places. I will try to make all the things happen. I will try to solve other people's problems. And every once in a while, it's like, hey, what's on that important list? And how do we schedule time and prioritize a block of time, to do that? And then, of course, like I said, I'm 42, so like my health is just super important to me, and so prioritizing that from a exercise and health and eating and all of that standpoint, it's hard to human in 2024. So you have to pick your battles and like
gotta have some tools in your toolkit.
Gotta have tools in your toolkit.
Make time for health.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And then stuff like this. I mean, just having this conversation today is like very generative for me. So I thank you for giving me time to be here today.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on and sharing your really amazing career and how you've gotten from place to place. But really, I think the theme of it is just like following your curiosity, right? And being open to and available and prepared for opportunities when there's not a box that you want to fit into, but there's a space where you can make room for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. We love options.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, there was a lot of great advice and experience in everything that Jill shared. She talked a lot about how she built her career pyramid, kind of wide and varied at the bottom, adding new experiences to the foundation, stone by stone in every role that she had. And then she followed her curiosity to find new ways of using that foundation, those tools and talents, across new industries and in new functions within different companies. Now, I want to dive more into how we can find the thing behind the thing, the common threads that you can find in your past, you can hold on to in your present, and that you can follow into new places in your career in the future. I want to say that this isn't one big thing, by the way. So first, let's take the pressure off of yourself that there's like one magical answer to solving the mystery and finding your dream career. The reality is that there are probably lots of little threads that you can choose from, and you can choose the ones that you really want to start to emphasize more. The single best way to do this is by collecting stories, specific examples, and finding those themes within those stories. So here are two ways that you can start to do it. One is collect your own stories from yourself. One resource to use is a book called Find Your Zone of Genius by Laura Garnett. And in this book, she talks about how you can find stories that will help you identify your zone of genius in your work. You start by answering kind of two basic questions. What are the moments and the tasks that I'm doing when I'm in the zone? When I'm intellectually on fire or I'm really energized by the work that I'm doing? And then the second question is, what are the types of problems that I was solving that led to these in the zone moments? So come up with a couple of stories that answer those questions. Now, way number two is collecting stories from others. You can enroll others in this through an exercise called Reflective Best Self. This is something that I've talked about before on this podcast. It's something that I first heard about in my master's program. And this is essentially just asking a group of people who know you well to share up to 3 stories about you at your best. These can help you capture moments when people saw you in action. It could be at work when you took on a new challenge and you triumphed over it, or at Thanksgiving dinner when the oven broke and you figured out a way to have an amazing celebration regardless. And then you can read through and kind of analyze these stories for themes. There's a website that will help you collect these stories and guide you through some basics, and I'll link this in the show notes. The last resource that I'll share on this part is episode 24 of Working Your Way. And this episode is all about defining your personal brand. And in it, my guests and I speak at length about finding this unique value that you have and sharing a bunch of ways to reflect and explore the topic. Now, Jill also mentioned a book during this episode, Designing Your Life, from a well-known Stanford course. And actually, Sybil mentioned this in episode 11 also, so I'll link that book as well. I hope you leave this episode inspired to better understand the common threads of your own talents and have this be a way that you can expand the possibilities that you see for yourself in your own career.